It's funny how life can turn on a dime, isn't it? One moment, everything feels safe, familiar, even boring, and the next, you're caught in a storm you never saw coming. My name is Kyrie McMahon, and if you told me a week ago that I'd be sharing this story with the world, I wouldn't have believed you. But sometimes, the truth is too heavy to carry alone. Before we begin, I want to warn you that this story contains mature themes. It deals with the challenges of new motherhood, family relationships, and infidelity. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop watching now. It all started on what seemed like an ordinary Saturday afternoon. The Ravens were playing, and my mom, Belen Enriquez, had invited her best friend from high school, Irene Ochoa, to watch the game with us. Irene was practically family. She and my mom had been inseparable for as long as I could remember, and she'd been in my life since I was a kid. I called her Auntie Irene growing up, though we weren't related. That's how close she was to us. The living room buzzed with excitement. The sound of the commentators' voices echoed through the house as my mom and Irene laughed, reminiscing about the old days. The smell of popcorn hung in the air, and the energy was light, carefree, exactly how weekends are supposed to feel. I was sprawled out on the couch, focused on the game. I had on a loose pair of basketball shorts and a hoodie, my go-to lazy day outfit. My mom and Irene were sitting together on the other side of the room, talking and sipping wine between plays. Everything seemed normal. Just another weekend. But then, things started to shift. It was subtle at first. Irene's laughter, warm and full of life, seemed to linger just a little longer than usual when she looked at me. I didn't think much of it at the time. She always had a big personality, always joking, always playful. She was the kind of person who could light up a room, and as far as I knew, her intentions had never been anything but kind. But then there were her eyes. The way they lingered, the way her gaze seemed to cut through me, left me feeling exposed. I wasn't sure why it bothered me, but it did. I chalked it up to being overly self-conscious. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just reading too much into it. And then came the comments. It happened after a big play. I jumped off the couch, yelling at the screen as the Ravens scored a touchdown. My excitement got the better of me, and I didn't notice at first, but Irene and my mom had stopped talking. They were watching me, and when I turned to look at them, they quickly exchanged a glance and laughed. "You're all grown up now, huh?" Irene said with a smile, her tone light but her eyes carrying something I couldn't quite place. My mom chuckled, nodding. "He's all man now," she said, almost proudly. There was a part of me that wanted to laugh it off, but something about the moment didn't feel right. The way they were looking at me, at each other, it was like they were sharing some kind of unspoken joke, and I was the punchline. I shifted uncomfortably, pretending I didn't notice. But I did notice. And the thing is, once you start noticing, it's impossible to stop. If you're still with me, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. Trust me, there's so much more to uncover. At first, I thought I was imagining it. You know that feeling when something feels off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That's how it started with Irene. I'd known her my whole life. She was practically a second mother to me, kind, supportive, and always so full of energy. But as the afternoon went on, her energy felt different. She moved closer to where I was sitting. It wasn't sudden or obvious, but little by little, she closed the space between us. I noticed it when she laughed, leaning forward just enough for her hand to brush my leg as if by accident. It wasn't anything I could call out, it didn't feel deliberate at first, but I noticed. "Kyrie, you're not a little boy anymore," Irene said out of nowhere during halftime, her voice playful, but something about it unsettled me. "Yeah, he's grown into quite the man," my mom chimed in, smiling as if I weren't sitting right there. I laughed nervously, unsure of what to say. Compliments were normal in our house, but there was something about the way they both looked at me that didn't feel like the kind of praise you get from family. It was like they were in on some kind of joke I didn't understand. When the game started back up, I tried to focus on the screen, but Irene kept breaking my attention. She would glance over at me, her eyes lingering just a second too long. I'd catch her staring, and she'd look away quickly, pretending to adjust her hair or take another sip of wine. But her gaze always found its way back. The uneasy feeling in my gut started to grow. Was I overthinking? Was I being paranoid? And then she said something that hit me like a punch to the stomach. "You know, I remember when you were a baby," Irene said with a soft laugh. "Running around in diapers, always causing trouble. Now look at you." She paused, looking me up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. "All grown up." I froze. My mom laughed, like it was the funniest thing she'd heard all day. "He's definitely grown up," she added with a sly smile, her eyes meeting Irene's. It wasn't the words that bothered me. It was the way they said them. There was something underneath, something unspoken that made me feel exposed, like I was under a microscope. I couldn't help but shift uncomfortably in my seat. My face felt hot, and my hands were clammy, but I forced myself to laugh along with them. "Yeah, well, I guess we all grow up eventually," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Irene didn't respond right away. Instead, she leaned back into the couch, her head tilted as she studied me. I could feel her eyes on me, but I didn't dare look back. "You're right," she finally said, her tone softer now, almost teasing. "We do all grow up. Some faster than others." The air in the room felt heavy, like all the oxygen had been sucked out. I glanced over at my mom, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but she didn't seem to notice, or maybe she just didn't care. At that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the only one who didn't understand what was really happening. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Irene's comments, her glances, the way her hand brushed my leg, none of it felt innocent. But what hit me the hardest was my mom, Belen. She was right there. She saw what was happening. And instead of stepping in, she joined in. That realization sat heavy in my chest, twisting everything I thought I knew about the two women I trusted most in my life. I'd grown up thinking of them as protectors, people who had my best interests at heart. But now, I couldn't help but feel like I was being put on display, like I was the punchline to some unspoken joke. I tried to focus on the game, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. The TV blared in the background, but I couldn't hear a word. My thoughts drowned everything out. Why would my mom let this happen? My hands tightened into fists in my lap, hidden by my hoodie. I stared at the screen, pretending to watch, but my chest felt tight. It was like I couldn't catch my breath. "This is Irene," I told myself. "She's family. She's been in my life forever. She's always been kind, supportive, almost like a second mom." But none of that mattered now. All I could think about was the way her eyes lingered on me when she thought I wasn't looking, or the way her tone shifted when she talked about how grown up I was. And my mom. Every time Irene said something inappropriate, my mom just laughed. She didn't step in or tell her to stop. She didn't even seem uncomfortable. She acted like it was all perfectly normal. But it wasn't normal. My mind kept circling back to the same question: why wasn't she doing anything? She'd always told me that she would protect me, no matter what. That family looks out for each other. That she'd always have my back. And now? Now, she was sitting there, feeding into something that felt so deeply wrong I didn't even know how to process it. The trust I'd always had in her was unraveling, and I could feel it slipping away with every second that passed. I kept telling myself I was overthinking. That maybe it wasn't as bad as it felt. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, my gut wouldn't let it go. I felt like a kid again, like I was caught in the middle of something I didn't understand. Only this time, there wasn't anyone to pull me out. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Every time Irene laughed, every time my mom smiled, I felt more and more like I was suffocating. What do I do? The thought ran through my head over and over. Do I say something? Do I leave? Would they even take me seriously if I spoke up? Or would they just laugh at me again? I was stuck, frozen in place. The anger came next, quiet but overwhelming. It wasn't the kind of anger that made you yell or lash out. It was the kind that sat in your chest, growing heavier and heavier until it felt like you couldn't breathe. This is my home. That thought hit me like a punch to the gut. This is supposed to be my safe space. But in that moment, I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel comfortable. And the worst part? I didn't feel like I could trust the people who were supposed to be looking out for me. I couldn't even look at them. Every time I tried, all I saw were the glances they shared, the subtle smiles, the knowing looks. It made my stomach turn. I stared at the screen, pretending like I was still watching the game. But I wasn't. I couldn't focus. My thoughts were too loud, and the uneasy feeling in my chest was too strong. Why? That was the question I kept coming back to. Why would they act like this? Why would my mom just let this happen? And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find an answer. It happened so fast, and yet it felt like time had slowed down. 1 minute, we were sitting there in the living room. The game was on, the lights were dim, and the sound of the announcers filled the air. And the next? I felt like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Irene shifted closer to me on the couch, and I froze. I didn't know why, but something about the way she moved made my chest tighten. Her voice broke through the noise of the TV, soft and almost teasing. "You've been so quiet tonight, Kyrie. What's on your mind?" Her tone was too familiar, too personal. I could feel my mom's eyes on me from across the room, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. My throat was dry, and every muscle in my body felt tense. "I'm just watching the game," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. Irene smiled, but it wasn't the warm, friendly smile I'd known all my life. It was something else, something I didn't recognize. "You've really grown up," she said, her voice soft but deliberate. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up abruptly, the movement awkward and jerky. I think I'm gonna head to my room," I said quickly, avoiding eye contact. But before I could take a step, my mom's voice stopped me. "Sit down, Kyrie," she said, her tone firm but calm, like this was just another normal conversation. I hesitated, caught between the urge to leave and the weight of her words. I turned to look at her, hoping to see some kind of reassurance, some kind of explanation for what was happening. But there was nothing. Just a faint, almost knowing smile that made my stomach churn. I sank back onto the couch, feeling like I didn't have a choice. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty. Irene was still sitting close, too close, and I could feel the heat radiating off her as she leaned in slightly. "You're so tense," she said softly, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Relax. We're just talking." Talking? This wasn't talking. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. I looked at my mom again, hoping, praying, that she'd step in, that she'd say something to stop this. But instead, she just sat there, watching. Watching. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't going to stop it. She wasn't going to say anything. She was letting this happen. The weight of that realization crashed down on me like a tidal wave. My mom, my protector, my safe place, wasn't protecting me. She wasn't stopping Irene. She wasn't doing anything at all. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in around me. My chest was tight, my breathing shallow. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was sit there, paralyzed by the betrayal that was unfolding right in front of me. Irene's hand slid down my arm, and I flinched, pulling away instinctively. "Don't be shy," she said with a soft laugh, as if none of this was wrong. I wanted to scream, to yell at them to stop, to demand answers. But the words wouldn't come. My mind was racing, but my body wouldn't respond. Why is this happening? Why isn't she stopping this? I glanced at my mom one last time, hoping, desperately hoping, that I'd see something, anything, to make this make sense. But all I saw was indifference. She didn't look shocked or angry. She didn't look uncomfortable. She looked complicit. And that broke me. The woman who had raised me, who had promised to always be there for me, was sitting there, silently watching as her best friend crossed every boundary I didn't even know I had. I felt a tear slip down my cheek before I could stop it, and I quickly wiped it away, embarrassed even in that moment. I couldn't let them see how much this was affecting me. I couldn't let them know how completely shattered I felt. But inside, I was screaming. When I woke up the next morning, the house was silent. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of everything. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out all the parts of me that used to feel safe and grounded. The air in my room felt heavier than it had ever been before, like it was pressing down on me. I replayed the events of the night over and over in my head, searching for a way to explain it. Searching for a way to make it make sense. But no matter how I turned it around, it didn't add up. How could they do this to me? I couldn't get their faces out of my mind, the looks they shared, the tone of their voices, the laughter that felt so casual, so normal to them. But it wasn't normal to me. It wasn't funny. It wasn't okay. I thought of my mom, the woman who had raised me, taught me about trust, about boundaries, about respect. The woman who had always told me that family sticks together, that no matter what, we protect each other. Was it all a lie? I wanted to talk to her. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted her to explain herself, to tell me that what I saw and felt wasn't real. That I'd misunderstood everything. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't something I'd imagined. It happened. It was real. And she let it happen. That realization hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't just Irene's actions that betrayed me. It was my mom's silence. Her passivity. Her refusal to step in when I needed her most. I stood up and paced the room, my hands trembling as I rubbed my face, trying to shake the heaviness that refused to let go of me. I felt raw, exposed, like I was standing in the middle of an open field during a storm with no shelter in sight. And then the anger came back, just as it had the night before. But this time, it wasn't quiet. It wasn't contained. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I fought the urge to scream. Why? The question tore through my mind again and again. Why did this happen? Why didn't she stop it? Why didn't she protect me? I sat back down on my bed, my head in my hands, as the anger gave way to something else. Something I couldn't stop, no matter how hard I tried. Tears streamed down my face, hot and relentless, as the weight of everything crashed over me. I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just hurt. I was broken. I felt betrayed in the deepest sense of the word. By Irene, someone I had trusted like family. And by my mom, the one person I thought I could rely on no matter what. The two people I should have been able to feel safest with had become the source of my deepest pain. For hours, I sat there, staring at the wall, my mind jumping from one thought to another. Would I ever be able to trust them again? Would I ever be able to look my mom in the eyes without feeling that knot of betrayal in my chest? Would I ever feel normal again? And the truth is, I didn't know the answers to any of those questions. What I did know was that this wasn't something I could forget. This wasn't something I could brush off or bury. This wasn't something I could just move on from. I thought about what this meant for my future. How would I trust anyone again after this? How would I let anyone get close to me when the people closest to me had hurt me in ways I couldn't even fully understand yet? The scars from this night weren't just emotional, they were foundational. They cut into the core of who I was, of what I believed about family, about relationships, about myself. I wasn't sure where to go from here, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't the same person I was yesterday. That version of me, the one who trusted without question, who felt safe in his own home, who believed family would always protect him, that version of me was gone. And in his place was someone I didn't recognize yet. Either way, I want to hear what you think. Tell me, what would you do if your world fell apart like mine did? How would you move forward? Let me know in the comments. And if this story made you feel something, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.